The janitor who stopped the fire. In every hospital, there are doctors in crisp white coats, nurses in scrubs rushing from room to room, and surgeons who carry the weight of life and death in their hands. Their names are spoken with reverence. Their titles command respect. And then, there are people like Samuel. Samuel was a hospital janitor. He wore no stethoscope. He carried no medical charts. His uniform was a faded navy blue overall, and his tools were a mop, a broom, and a battered set of keys that jingled softly at his waist. To most people, Samuel was invisible. They walked past him in the long white corridors without a glance. At best, he was part of the scenery. At worst, he was in the way. But Samuel didn't mind. He hummed quietly to himself as he mopped the marble floors, his soft voice blending with the rhythmic squeak of the mop. He worked slowly, carefully, as though the shine of the floor somehow mattered as much as a surgeon's steady hand. If you asked him, he would say he wasn't important. But the truth is, he noticed everything. Samuel had eyes like a watchman's. He noticed a little boy who had been sitting alone in the waiting area for over an hour, his legs swinging nervously from the chair. Samuel crouched down, offered him a wrapped biscuit from his lunchbox, and stayed with him until his mother returned from the pharmacy. He noticed the old man who always spilled water from the cooler because his hands trembled. Samuel started leaving cups already filled for him each evening. He noticed the flickering light in the maternity ward hallway, the kind of small detail others ignored. But Samuel made sure to replace the bulb himself. He said he didn't want new mothers walking into darkness, even for a second. Every day, he moved quietly through the hospital, doing his work with a devotion that seemed out of place for a man whose name nobody knew. Doctors healed, nurses comforted. But Samuel cared in silence. It was a stormy Thursday night when Samuel first smelled it. He was emptying trash bins near the West Wing, humming a hymn his mother used to sing. That's when something cut through the scent of disinfectant and floor polish. Something sharp, something bitter. Smoke. Samuel paused. He sniffed the air again. Faint, but unmistakable. He followed it down the hall until he reached a locked storage room. The doorknob felt slightly warm. Not hot, but warmer than it should have been. Samuel frowned. He knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Peering through the small glass panel, he saw nothing unusual, just shelves stacked with supplies. Still uneasy, Samuel reported it to his supervisor. But the man barely looked up from his clipboard. Probably a burnt-out wire. Maintenance will handle it tomorrow. Just finish your rounds, Sam. Samuel hesitated. He wanted to insist. But years of being brushed aside had taught him that his voice carried little weight. So he returned to his mop, but the unease stayed with him. Hours passed. The hospital slowed into its midnight rhythm. Patients slept. Nurses worked quietly at their stations. And Samuel kept hearing the storm outside, the rain hammering the windows, the low growl of thunder. But underneath it all, he still thought he smelled smoke. He mentioned it again to a passing nurse. She gave him a polite but distracted smile, the kind people give when they don't really believe you. To them, Samuel was just a janitor. What could he possibly know? It was 12:47 a.m. when the alarms finally screamed. A piercing wail tore through the silence. Red lights flashed. Panic spread like wildfire even before the real fire showed its face. Smoke began seeping into the east corridor. Thick, black, suffocating. Patients coughed and cried out. Nurses shouted orders. Somewhere, a child screamed for their mother. The sprinklers activated, except in one wing. The very wing where Samuel had smelled the smoke. The very storage room whose doorknob had felt warm. And then the fire burst out. The door cracked open with a roar, flames exploding into the hallway like a monster finally freed from its cage. Everyone else ran from the flames. But Samuel ran toward them. He didn't think of himself. He didn't stop to wonder if anyone would thank him. He just grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, pulled the pin, and forced the storage door fully open. Heat hit him like a wall. Smoke stung his eyes. But Samuel fought, blasting foam into the heart of the flames. It wasn't enough to kill the fire, but it slowed it. It bought time. And time, in a burning hospital, meant lives. As the fire raged, Samuel shouted down the hall, his voice breaking through panic. "This way! Stay low! Follow me!" The hospital was chaos. Samuel darted through hallways, guiding the lost. He lifted patients into wheelchairs, pushing them toward the exits. He found a terrified little girl crying under a bed, pulled out his handkerchief, pressed it to her mouth and nose, and carried her in his arms through the choking smoke. Everywhere he turned, Samuel was there. Doctors and nurses worked heroically too, but Samuel seemed to appear in the very places where fear was greatest. He moved like a shadow with purpose, shepherding the weak, steadying the trembling. His uniform was soon soaked with sweat and ash. His hands were blistered from the extinguisher. His voice grew hoarse from shouting. But still, he went back, again and again. By the time firefighters stormed in, much of the hospital had been evacuated. The West Wing, though scarred by smoke, still stood. And Samuel was last seen running back inside. A nurse tried to stop him, shouting, "Sam, no, it's too dangerous." But he shook his head and disappeared into the smoke. Moments later, a thunderous crack split the air. A section of the ceiling collapsed. The crowd outside gasped. Some turned their faces away, unable to watch. Silence fell, broken only by the roar of flames and the hiss of fire hoses. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, 2 firefighters emerged, carrying a body between them. Samuel, his uniform was blackened with soot, his face pale. In his hand, clenched so tightly they had to pry it open, was a hospital's emergency floor plan, crumpled, charred, but still legible. He had gone back not for himself, but to guide rescuers. Doctors rushed to him, performing CPR, working frantically. The very people who had once walked past him as if he were invisible now fought to keep his heart beating. And then, against all odds, Samuel gasped. Alive. Broken, but alive. In the days that followed, news of the fire spread. The hospital was damaged, but because of Samuel, almost every patient had escaped. He had saved children. He had saved the elderly. He had saved people who had never once looked him in the eye. Doctors who once overlooked him now spoke his name with reverence. Nurses who once smiled politely now wept openly at his bedside. And the city called him a hero. But Samuel never wanted medals. He never wanted applause. When a reporter asked why he went back into the fire, Samuel gave the simplest answer: because there were people still inside. Closing reflection. Heroes don't always wear uniforms of glory. They don't always hold ranks, titles, or power. Sometimes they wear overalls. Sometimes they carry mops. Sometimes the greatest courage is hidden in the most ordinary of people. That night, a janitor saved hundreds of lives. And though the world may forget his face, the truth remains: greatness hides in unexpected places. And heroes are often the ones we never see.